At 32, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. I called my parents crying, begging for support. My father told me they could not deal with it because my younger sister was planning her wedding. I went through chemotherapy completely alone. 3 years later, I am cancer-free and the managing partner of a private wealth fund. Last week, my father called me crying. He needed a caregiver. My response took exactly 6 words. Before I share how I dismantled my toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe blood does not make someone family. The panoramic view of Manhattan from my 40th floor boardroom usually gave me a sense of peace. Today it was just background noise to the steady hum of my morning espresso machine. I am Maya, 35 years old, and I have spent the last 3 years building an empire out of pure spite and survival. My tailored designer suit felt like armor. Underneath the expensive silk, my fingers subconsciously brushed against my collarbone. The faint raised skin of my chemo port scar was always there to remind me of the price of my independence. I was reviewing a high-yield portfolio when my personal cell phone buzzed against the mahogany table. The screen lit up with a contact name I had not answered in 3 years. Marcus, sperm donor. For a moment, I just watched the device vibrate. The man who donated half his DNA to me was calling. I picked up the phone, bypassed the usual greeting, and simply accepted the call on speaker. Maya, please, you have to help us. The voice on the other end was frantic, slurred, and wet with tears. It was a stark contrast to the booming authoritarian tone he used to rule our household in Atlanta. I had a stroke, Maya. A mild one, but the doctors say the right side of my body is paralyzed. Your mother cannot handle lifting me. She is struggling. I leaned back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I did not say a word. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void with his desperation. Maya, are you there? You need to fly down here and move back into your old room. We need a caregiver. Chloe and Brad are in Aspen right now for a ski trip, and they cannot be bothered to come back early. Chloe is too stressed anyway, and Brad is dealing with his investments. You are single. You have that accounting job you can do from anywhere. We are your family. You owe us this. His entitlement was breathtaking. My accounting job was actually my position as a managing partner at Vanguard Trust, but they did not know that. They never cared enough to ask. As he rambled on about family obligations and church values, the glass walls of my office faded away. In my mind, I was suddenly thrust back into a freezing hospital room 3 years ago. I was hooked up to an IV poison dripping into my veins to kill the cancer trying to eat me alive. I had called him that day, terrified, asking if he and Mom could come sit with me during my first round of chemotherapy. I just wanted my parents. Instead of comfort, I got irritation. I remember the exact sound of his voice through the cheap hospital phone speaker. He told me that Chloe was stressed about her floral arrangements, and his parents were flying in. He told me my illness was an inconvenience to their perfect timeline. He chose a wedding over my life. Maya, answer me right now. Marcus was shouting now, his frustration breaking through the pathetic crying. The doctors are coming back in 10 minutes, and I need to tell them my eldest daughter is taking over my care. Book a flight today. I set my espresso cup down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the wood. I looked out over the New York skyline, feeling absolutely nothing for the man on the other end of the line. No pity, no anger, just a profound, icy clarity. I cannot deal with this today. I delivered the 6 words with surgical precision. They were the exact words he had given me when I was facing death. The line went dead quiet. I could practically hear his brain struggling to process the rejection. He remembered the phrase. I knew he did. Excuse me, he finally gasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sudden rage. You ungrateful little brat. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. If you do not get on a plane and come take care of your father, I will strip your name from my will. You will not get a single dime of my estate. I will leave everything to Chloe and Brad. You will have nothing. I smiled at the empty room. My net worth was currently triple whatever miserable retirement fund he was threatening me with. But the real irony was something much sweeter. "Do whatever you want, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Enjoy Aspen by proxy." I ended the call and placed the phone face down. Before the screen even went black, my office door swung open. My executive assistant stepped in holding a thick red folder. "Excuse me, Maya," she said professionally. "We just received an urgent loan application for $500,000. It requires your direct approval. The applicants are Brad and Chloe. They used a residential property as collateral." I felt a slow and deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. "Put it on my desk right now," I replied to her. "Let us see exactly what my sister and her husband are up to today, because I feel that their perfect little world is about to permanently and painfully collapse soon." The heavy oak door of my office clicked shut behind my assistant, leaving me alone with the thick red folder she had just placed on the polished mahogany surface. I reached out and flipped open the cover, my eyes immediately scanning the first page of the loan application. The bold printed letters at the top stated the requested amount of $500,000. Below that, the primary applicant was listed as Bradley Vance, followed by my younger sister, Chloe Vance. I ran my fingertip over his messy signature that reeked of the unearned confidence he carried with him everywhere. Brad was a white commercial real estate broker who loved to dominate family dinners with unsolicited advice about the stock market. He spoke to me slowly, as if my career was some adorable diversity initiative rather than a cutthroat climb to the top of Vanguard Trust. I flipped to the second page to examine the business plan he had submitted to justify $500,000. It was a complete disaster. His boutique investment firm was hemorrhaging cash, drowning in unpaid vendor invoices and threatening lawsuits. Brad was truly desperate. He needed a massive injection of liquid capital to keep his doors open another month. Any junior risk analyst in my department would have tossed this application straight into the shredder. But what caught my full attention was the third page, the collateral documentation. To secure this high-risk commercial loan, Brad had pledged a residential property. I stared at the address printed on the deed. It was my parents' completely paid-off 5-bedroom house in the upscale suburbs of Atlanta. The same house Marcus was currently sitting in, crying about his mild stroke and demanding I return to play nursemaid. I looked at the authorization forms attached to the deed. The signatures belonging to Marcus and Brenda were dated 3 days ago. I knew my parents well enough to know they guarded their real estate equity with their lives. They would never willingly risk their primary residence for failing business ventures. The signatures were either expertly forged or extracted under immense duress, while my father was heavily medicated post-stroke. Sister Chloe had clearly helped her husband execute this massive financial fraud against our own parents. A normal managing partner would immediately flag this application for internal fraud review. A loving daughter would quickly call her parents to warn them that their golden child and her perfect husband were secretly trying to gamble away the family home. I was neither of those things today. I picked up my gold-plated fountain pen. The smooth metal felt cold and heavy in my hand. I thought about Chloe trying on $10,000 wedding dresses while I sat in a sterile oncology ward, vomiting from chemotherapy. I thought about Brenda telling our relatives that my cancer diagnosis was ruining the festive mood of the wedding season. I thought about Brad looking at my bald head and making a cruel joke about how I finally found a way to save money on haircuts. They all thought they were untouchable. They believed their actions had no consequences because I had walked away quietly to heal in peace. They mistook my silence for weakness. I lowered the tip of my pen to the signature line at the bottom of the approval page. With a steady hand and a calm heart, I signed my name, authorizing the immediate release of $500,000. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. My assistant answered instantly. "Come back in here, please," I calmly instructed. She entered the room a few seconds later, her professional demeanor firmly in place. I slid the red folder across the desk toward her. "The loan is fully approved," I said. "Fast-track the funds to his business account by the end of business today. I want the money cleared and available for him to spend immediately." My assistant blinked in surprise, looking down at the folder and then back up at me. Are you certain, Maya? The risk assessment algorithm flagged this application with a 90% probability of default within the very first quarter. The collateral is the only solid asset they presented. I smiled, feeling a deep, dark satisfaction settling into my bones. I am entirely certain, I replied. I want you to personally oversee this account. Ensure that the terms of the agreement are strictly enforced. The moment he misses a single payment, even by 1 day, I want the immediate default clause activated. We will move to seize the collateral property without a second of hesitation or a single grace period. Make sure the legal team is fully prepped. She nodded, picking up the folder with a knowing look. I will handle it personally, she promised before exiting the office. I turned my chair back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling city. I had just handed Brad the rope he needed to hang himself, and I knew he was arrogant enough to tie the knot. He would take that money, blow it on frivolous things to maintain his wealthy facade, and default on the loan. Then I would legally own the house my parents loved more than they ever loved me. I would take the very roof over their heads. Just as the thought crossed my mind, my cell phone vibrated violently against the desk. The screen illuminated with a new text message. The sender was Brad. I picked up the device and opened the message. The text was aggressive, dripping with the same toxic entitlement that defined my entire biological family. Your mother is sick of your attitude, the message read. You are incredibly selfish for stressing your father out while he is sick. We are coming to your little Brooklyn rat hole tomorrow to teach you some family respect. Have your bags packed. I locked the screen and let out a cold laugh. They were dead to me. The following morning arrived with a crisp edge to the autumn air, the kind of day that usually made me appreciate the sweeping views of the East River from my living room. I was standing in my kitchen pouring freshly brewed coffee into a ceramic mug when the intercom chimed. The concierge at the front desk announced that my mother and brother-in-law had arrived. I instructed him to send them up. I knew exactly what they were expecting to find. When I gave them my Brooklyn address years ago, I never bothered to mention it was located in one of the most exclusive high-rises in the borough. In their minds, Brooklyn meant struggle. It meant crime rates, cramped walk-ups, and the kind of poverty they associated with a black woman who had dared to walk away from their definition of success. I could easily picture Brad in the lobby sneering at the neighborhood on his way in. He was the type of white man who considered stepping foot outside of specific Manhattan zip codes to be a charitable act. I imagined him making some loud offhand comment to my mother about the local demographics, checking his designer watch, and complaining about the lack of valet parking. He would be adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit, fully prepared to look down his nose at my supposedly pathetic living conditions. They both thought they were walking into a squalid little apartment to terrorize a desperate broken woman. The private elevator chimed, signaling their arrival at my floor. The heavy steel doors slid open smoothly, stepping directly into my $8 million penthouse. The expansive foyer featured custom hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows bathing the space in natural light, and a curated collection of contemporary art that cost more than their entire wedding. I leaned against my massive white marble kitchen island, holding my coffee mug, and watched their expressions. Brad stepped out first, a condescending smirk already plastered across his face, ready to deliver whatever rehearsed insult he had prepared. The smirk vanished instantly. He froze in his tracks, his eyes darting wildly across the vaulted ceilings, the custom chandeliers, and the sprawling open-concept living area. I watched the arrogant confidence completely drain from his posture. It was replaced immediately by a bristling, aggressive insecurity. His jaw tightened and he shoved his hands into his pockets, clearly unnerved by the undeniable display of wealth that vastly overshadowed his own fabricated success. He had come here to feel superior, to mock my accounting job, and the reality of my sanctuary struck him like a physical blow. My mother, Brenda, pushed past him. Unlike Brad, she refused to let the environment intimidate her. In fact, she weaponized her willful ignorance aggressively, disregarding the luxury surrounding her, as if it were simply a mirage. She marched straight toward my kitchen island, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She was clutching a thick, crumpled manila folder. Her face was twisted into a familiar mask of maternal disappointment and righteous indignation. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She slammed the folder down onto the pristine marble surface. Medical bills and insurance denial letters spilled out, scattering across the counter. "You need to pay these right now," she demanded, her voice echoing shrilly. "Your father is sitting in a hospital bed with half his face paralyzed, and you are up here ignoring our calls. We are transferring him to a rehabilitation facility, and the out-of-pocket costs are astronomical." Brad is already dealing with so much stress from his massive investments, and Chloe is overwhelmed trying to support him. "You need to pack your things, quit your little accounting job, and come home to take care of your family." I slowly took a sip of my coffee, maintaining eye contact with her. "You drove all the way to Brooklyn to hand me a stack of papers I am never going to pay," I said calmly. "Chloe does not work. She spends her days getting manicures and planning luxury vacations. If anyone has the free time to change bedpans, it is her." Brad stepped forward, his face flushed with misplaced authority. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," he snapped, trying to regain his footing. "You are going to do exactly what your mother says. Chloe is building a family with me, and she needs to focus on her role as a wife. We are not going to let your selfish behavior ruin our lives. You owe your parents everything." I set my mug down and laughed, a sharp sound that made Brad flinch. "I owe them nothing," I replied. "When I was lying in an oncology ward 3 years ago, bald, and fighting for my life, neither of you could be bothered to visit. You were too busy booking a country club for a wedding. You told me my cancer was an inconvenience. Now his stroke is your inconvenience. Handle it yourselves." Brenda stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with a toxic, familiar cruelty. She looked me up and down, her gaze intentionally landing on my chest where my tailored blouse concealed the surgical scars of my double mastectomy. "Do not you dare act like your situation was the same," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Chloe has a future. She has a husband. She is going to give me beautiful grandchildren. What do you have? Look at yourself. You had cancer. You lost your breasts. You are a damaged, stubborn woman who no man is ever going to want anyway. You have no future, Maya. Serving your family is the only useful thing you have left to do with your life. You belong at home taking care of your father because nobody else is ever going to take care of you." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling the last remaining shred of daughterly obligation wither and die. I stood perfectly still as my mother's vile words hung in the air. She expected me to crumble. She expected the terrified cancer patient who had begged for her parents' love to resurface and weep. She wanted to see me break under the weight of her cruelty regarding my surgically altered body. Instead, I felt nothing but icy clarity. The fire that kept me alive through toxic chemotherapy had burned away my need for her approval. I looked down at my chest, and then back up to her face. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned my back on her and walked slowly toward the smart home control panel mounted on the far wall of the living room. My bare feet moved silently across the hardwood floor. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A loud mechanical click echoed as the private elevator doors locked, shutting off their only exit. Brad immediately tensed. I picked up the intercom receiver and pressed the button for the lobby. "This is Maya in the penthouse," I said. "I have 2 aggressive trespassers refusing to leave my property. Send security up immediately to escort them out." I placed the receiver back on the wall and turned to face my uninvited guests. Panic flashed across my mother's face, but it was Brad who stepped forward, trying to salvage his bruised ego. "You cannot lock us in here," he barked, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert dominance. "I am a highly respected commercial broker, and you are effectively holding us hostage in this overly expensive glass box." I walked slowly back toward the kitchen island, closing the distance between us. I let my eyes travel up and down his tailored suit, taking in the arrogant posture that masked his financial desperation. "You talk a big game about family responsibility, Brad," I said, keeping my tone dangerously low and steady. You march into my home trying to act like the wealthy patriarch of the Vance family. But let us talk about your actual priorities. You drove here today in a brand new custom-ordered Porsche. I saw it pull into the loading zone on the building's security feed. You are wearing a suit that costs more than a decent mortgage payment. Yet your father-in-law, the man you claim to care so much about, is currently lying in a severely underfunded public hospital ward with a paralyzed face because you absolutely refuse to pay a single dime toward his medical care. You expect the cancer survivor you mock to foot the bill while you play pretend on Wall Street. Brad's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his crisp white collar. His facade of being the sophisticated white savior of my family was cracking under the weight of the truth. "You shut your mouth!" he screamed, pointing a trembling finger inches from my face. "You know absolutely nothing about my finances or my investments. I am a financial genius. I manage high-level portfolios that you could not even comprehend with your little accounting job. I am building a legacy for your sister. I will ruin you for this. I will make a few calls to the board members at your firm and have you fired by Monday morning. I will personally see to it that you are put right back in your place." I did not move a muscle. I simply stared at him, absorbing his pathetic threats with a cold smile. "You are more than welcome to try Brad," I replied softly. "I highly encourage you to make those phone calls. I would love to see how your imaginary Wall Street friends react." Before he could unleash another volley of empty threats, the heavy steel doors of the private elevator chimed. The electronic lock disengaged, and the doors slid open to reveal 3 massive security guards dressed in immaculate black suits. They stepped into the penthouse, their expressions stern and uncompromising. The head of security, a towering man named David, immediately identified the threat. He walked straight toward Brad and clamped a massive hand firmly onto his tailored shoulder. "It is time for you to leave," Sir David instructed in a voice that left absolutely no room for debate. Brad tried to yank his arm away, but David effortlessly twisted his grip, forcing Brad toward the open elevator. "Do not touch me," Brad yelled, his voice cracking in humiliation as he stumbled backward. "I will sue this entire building. I will have your job." David ignored the outburst and shoved him inside the elevator car. My mother realized the confrontation was entirely lost. Her initial arrogant confidence had completely evaporated, but her spite remained deeply entrenched. She scrambled backward to avoid being grabbed by the other security guards. She pointed fiercely at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You are a demon!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are a godless, selfish demon. This Sunday is my 60th birthday celebration at the community church. The entire congregation will be there. All of our relatives will be there. The pastor will be there. I am going to stand at the pulpit and expose exactly what kind of monster you truly are. I will make sure every single person in our community knows that you abandoned your dying father to rot while you live in luxury. You will be dead to everyone." The security guards guided her firmly into the elevator alongside her humiliated son-in-law. They stood there trapped in the small space, looking small and entirely defeated. I walked right up to the threshold of the private elevator doors, meeting my mother's furious gaze. I smiled broadly, anticipating the glorious destruction that was about to unfold. "Send me the invite," I said. The steel doors slid shut, cutting off her screaming voice and leaving me in total peace. Sunday morning arrived with the scent of rain and impending justice. I sat in my chauffeured car, watching the familiar brick facade of Mount Zion Community Church come into view. This was the spiritual epicenter of my parents' world. It was a place where reputation meant everything, and appearances were guarded more fiercely than actual salvation. I stepped out, letting my driver know to keep the engine running. I walked through the heavy wooden doors into the main fellowship hall. The space was packed with over 200 people. The air buzzed with the vibrant, energetic hum typical of a Black church celebration. Everyone was dressed in their Sunday best, wearing bright colors, sharp hats, and polished shoes. The long banquet tables were draped in pristine white linens, covered with elaborate floral centerpieces that my mother forced my sister to pay for using rapidly evaporating funds. At the center of the room, holding court like a visiting monarch, was Chloe. My younger sister was practically glowing with manufactured smugness. She wore a bright yellow silk dress that screamed for attention and made sure to gesture wildly with her left hand every time she spoke. The massive diamond ring on her finger caught the overhead lights, blinding anyone standing too close. She was soaking up the compliments from our older aunts, playing the role of the perfect wealthy daughter who married incredibly well. Right beside her was Brad, playing his favorite character, which was the benevolent white savior to a predominantly black congregation. I watched him lean against a pillar, swirling a glass of punch while dispensing unsolicited financial advice to a group of elderly deacons. He was tossing around buzzwords like diversified assets and aggressive growth portfolios with sickening confidence. The deacons nodded politely, but I could see the subtle caution in their eyes. Brad thought he was dazzling them with his Wall Street brilliance, but he was really just exposing his deep insecurity. He needed these people to think he was a genius, because he knew he was actually a complete fraud. I took a deep breath and stepped fully into the light of the hall. I was not hiding, I was not shrinking. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green suit that I had commissioned in Milan. The fabric alone cost more than Brad's entire fabricated portfolio. I paired it with minimalist gold jewelry and a posture forged in corporate boardrooms where weakness was instantly punished. I did not look like a sick, lonely spinster or a bitter dropout. I looked exactly like the apex predator of my industry. The effect was immediate. The lively chatter near the entrance suddenly died down, replaced by a fierce wave of whispers. Heads turned, eyes widened. The congregation parted slightly as I walked down the center aisle. I heard my aunt whispering to her neighbor about how healthy I looked, how fierce my walk was, and how my clothes looked expensive. The narrative my mother spent years building about my sad, pathetic life was visibly crumbling. With every single step I took toward the front of the room, Chloe spotted me from across the hall. Her bright, fake smile instantly collapsed into a tight line of panic and pure malice. She grabbed Brad by the arm, pulling him away from his captive audience. They whispered furiously to each other before Chloe marched directly toward me, her heels stomped aggressively against the tile floor. "Well, look who finally decided to show up to support this family," Chloe said, her voice artificially loud so the nearby tables could hear. "I am genuinely surprised you had the nerve to come here today. Maya, we thought you would be too ashamed to show your face after how you treated Mom and Dad this week." I stopped and looked down at her. "Hello, Chloe," I said smoothly. "Your ring looks heavy. I hope you have insurance on it. You never know when assets might be seized." Her face flushed an ugly shade of red. She pointed a manicured finger toward the far back corner of the fellowship hall near the kitchen doors. "I do not want you ruining Mom's big day with your miserable energy," Chloe hissed. "Since you do not have a husband or family of your own, you can go sit at table 12. That is the overflow table for single folks and older children. Stay out of the way and keep your mouth shut. Do not embarrass us." I glanced at table 12. It was tucked behind a structural pillar, completely removed from the main celebration. It was a classic mean girl tactic, designed to isolate and humiliate me in front of our entire extended family. I looked back at Chloe and smiled a cold, terrifying smile. "I think I will stand, Chloe," I replied, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise. "I want to make sure I have a perfect view of the stage. I hear the entertainment today is going to be absolutely unforgettable." Chloe glared at me, sensing the underlying threat, but too arrogant to understand its magnitude. She spun around and stomped back to Brad, gripping his arm like a lifeline. A moment later, the lights dimmed slightly. Pastor Jenkins stepped up onto the main stage and tapped the microphone. The congregation quieted down immediately. "Brothers and sisters, Pastor Jenkins began smiling warmly. Today we gather to celebrate a devoted mother, a faithful wife, and a woman who has weathered many storms. We are here to honor Sister Brenda on her 60th birthday. Brenda stood up, but she did not just wave. Before the pastor could say another word, Brenda marched up the steps and snatched the microphone right out of his hand. She gripped the microphone tightly, her shoulders shaking as she forced a loud theatrical sob to echo through the sound system, preparing to play the ultimate victim. She closed her eyes, entirely ready to deliver the most incredibly dramatic performance of her absolute lifetime right now. Brenda stood at the center of the elevated church stage, clutching the microphone with both hands as if her life depended on it. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly and let out a loud theatrical wail that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the massive fellowship hall. 200 guests fell completely silent, watching my mother perform the role she had practiced her entire life. She was the ultimate victim. "Look at my family," she cried, pointing a trembling finger toward the front row where my father Marcus sat slumped in his wheelchair. The right side of his face drooped slightly from his recent stroke. He has provided for us his whole life, and now when he needs his children the most, his eldest daughter turns her back on him. She opened her eyes and locked her tearful gaze directly on me. I stood perfectly still in my emerald green designer suit, feeling the collective weight of 200 pairs of eyes shifting in my direction. "Maya is standing right there," Brenda continued, her voice shaking with manufactured grief. "I asked her to come home to help care for her sick father. Do you know what she actually did? She completely ignored my pleas. She lives in a fancy apartment in New York City, hoarding her money while her own flesh and blood struggles to survive. It is selfish, and it is completely godless. She has abandoned the church, and she has abandoned her family." The older women in the congregation began to shake their heads, murmuring words of sympathy for my mother and casting looks of deep disappointment my way. Chloe rushed up the carpeted steps of the stage, her yellow silk dress swishing loudly. She wrapped one arm around our mother, playing the part of the devoted, supportive daughter perfectly. "Give me the mic, Mom," Chloe whispered loudly enough for the front rows to hear. She took the microphone and turned her glare toward me. Her diamond ring flashed under the stage lights, a strategic reminder of her supposedly perfect life. "Maya has always been exactly like this," Chloe announced to the crowded room. "She has always been bitterly jealous of absolutely everything I have. She could not stand it when I met Brad and had a beautiful wedding. She resents my happiness because she is miserable and alone." Chloe paused, letting her cruel words sink into the minds of our relatives and family friends. And whenever we ask her to take responsibility, she uses her past illness as a permanent crutch. Yes, she had cancer years ago, but she is cured now. She uses it as an excuse to avoid doing any real work for this family. She expects Brad and me to carry the entire burden of caring for our parents while she lives her selfish single life up north. It is disgusting, and I am sick of pretending she is a good person. The energy in the fellowship hall shifted entirely against me. The polite whispers turned into audible scoffs and heavy sighs of disapproval. Deacons who had known me since I was a little girl now looked at me with open disdain. Aunts and uncles who had never bothered to call me during my chemotherapy treatments were suddenly judging my character based on the vicious lies spewing from my sister. I looked over at Brad. My white brother-in-law was standing near the edge of the stage with his arms crossed over his chest. A massive, arrogant smirk stretched across his face. He looked incredibly proud of the public execution his wife and mother-in-law were conducting right now. In his mind, I was already defeated. He was eagerly waiting for my armor to crack. He fully expected me to burst into tears, turn around and run out of the heavy church doors in absolute humiliation. That was their strategy. They wanted to break my spirit in front of our entire community so I would surrender and submit to their demands. They wanted me to feel so ashamed that I would beg for their forgiveness and hand over my money to save their miserable lives. I did not cry. I did not run. I did not even break eye contact with Brad. I maintained my calm, steady posture and let a slow, chilling smile form on my lips. The sight of my smile caused Brad to uncross his arms, his arrogant smirk faltering just a fraction of an inch. I began to walk forward. I did not walk toward the exit. I walked directly toward the stage with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd parted around me as if I were carrying a contagious disease, but I ignored them completely. My focus was entirely on the small sound mixing board set up on a folding table, just to the left of the main stage. The church audio technician had stepped away to get a plate of food, leaving the equipment completely unattended. I reached the table and calmly extended my right hand. I grabbed the main audio cable connecting the stage microphone to the large speakers and pulled it out cleanly. Chloe was mid-sentence when her voice suddenly cut out completely. She tapped the microphone in confusion, looking around the room. I pulled my personal cell phone out of my pocket. I plugged the auxiliary cord directly into the headphone jack of my device. I tapped the bright screen and opened my saved audio files. I found the specific recording I had kept safe for 3 long and very painful years. I placed my index finger on the master volume slider of the soundboard and pushed it all the way to the absolute maximum level. I pressed play to let the entire congregation hear the brutal and honest truth about the very people they were currently praising. The time for keeping their filthy secrets was officially over, and the era of my absolute vengeance had just beautifully begun today. The silence in the massive fellowship hall was so absolute that I could hear the faint hum of the electrical current running through the soundboard. 200 people were holding their breath, waiting to see how I would defend myself against the vicious lies my mother and sister had just spewed from the church stage. They expected tears. They expected an apology. Instead, they got the undeniable truth. I rested my finger over the play button on my phone screen. I looked directly at Brenda, who was still clutching the microphone with white knuckles. I looked at Marcus sitting in his wheelchair in the front row. Then I pressed play. The church audio system was top of the line, designed for massive gospel choirs and booming sermons. When the voicemail recording blasted through the high-fidelity speakers, it sounded as if Marcus and Brenda were standing right next to every single person in that room. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every ounce of malice they had harbored 3 years ago. My father's voice boomed from the speakers, first heavy with annoyance and completely devoid of any parental warmth. "Listen to me very carefully," the recorded Marcus snapped. "I am not driving to that hospital, and we are absolutely not paying a single dime toward her medical bills. Let her handle her own cancer. She is a grown woman, and she needs to figure it out herself." Then came my mother's voice, shrill and dripping with toxic entitlement. The entire congregation recognized that voice immediately. It was the exact same voice that had just been weeping for sympathy moments ago. "We cannot deal with this today," the recorded. Brenda complained bitterly. "Chloe is marrying Brad in 2 months and her wedding needs to be absolutely perfect. We are completely stretched thin paying for the country club and the floral arrangements. Tell Maya to stop being such a burden on this family. She is ruining the festive mood for everyone with this sickness." The recording ended with a sharp click, followed by the sterile automated voice of the voicemail system announcing the exact date and time the message was left. It was exactly 3 years ago, during the exact week I was undergoing my most aggressive round of chemotherapy. The fellowship hall erupted into a wave of horrified gasps. The sound of 200 people simultaneously realizing they had been utterly deceived filled the cavernous room. The collective shock was palpable. The older deacons, who had been shaking their heads at me just a minute earlier, now stared at the stage with their mouths hanging wide open. The aunts and uncles, who had nodded along with my sister's cruel speech, looked as if they had just seen a ghost. I turned my gaze toward the center of the room. Pastor Jenkins was standing completely frozen near the front pews. He was a man who preached about grace and family devotion every single Sunday. Now he was looking up at my mother with an expression of absolute horror and profound disgust. The righteous victim narrative Brenda had spent the last hour building had just been incinerated in less than 30 seconds. On the stage, the transformation was magnificent to witness. Brenda looked as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Her theatrical tears dried up instantly, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a trapped animal. She dropped the stage microphone. It hit the wooden floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback that made people in the front rows cover their ears. Chloe completely lost whatever remained of her composure. The smug yellow silk-wearing princess vanished. She started screaming frantically, pointing her manicured fingers toward the soundboard. "Turn it off," she shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically. "Turn that off right now, Maya. You fabricated that. You edited that audio. You are lying to everyone. Stop looking at us like that." She was unraveling in real time. Her diamond ring flashed under the stage lights, but nobody was admiring her wealth anymore. They were staring at a monster who had prioritized country club centerpieces over her own sister's battle with stage 3 cancer. The congregation began to murmur loudly. The whispers turned into audible demands for an explanation. People were pointing at the stage, visibly outraged by the sheer hypocrisy they had just witnessed. Brad realized that the perfect white savior narrative he had been carefully cultivating all morning was rapidly disintegrating. The affluent, successful family he had married into was currently being exposed as a pack of heartless narcissists. His arrogant smirk was completely gone. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of red as aggressive insecurity took over. He stepped off the stage and began marching down the center aisle directly toward me. His fists were clenched at his sides. "Turn the machine off right now," Brad ordered, his voice booming with misplaced authority. "You are done making a scene, Maya. Give me that phone before I take it from you." He was moving fast, closing the distance between the stage and the sound table with heavy, aggressive strides. He fully intended to physically intimidate me, to rip the device from my hands and smash it to protect his fragile ego. The congregation watched in stunned silence as this supposedly refined investment broker charged at a woman like a raging bull. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood my ground beside the sound table, maintaining my calm posture and my cold smile. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. Brad lunged forward, reaching his hands out aggressively to grab my shoulders. He never even made contact. From the shadows near the kitchen entrance, a massive figure moved with terrifying speed. David, the head of my private security detail, stepped directly into Brad's path. David did not say a word. He simply intercepted the charging man, smoothly wrapping one massive hand around Brad's extended wrist, taking him down hard. David instantly slammed Brad onto the polished hardwood floor of the church. The entire congregation gasped as the wealthy investment broker hit the ground face first. David did not even break a single sweat. He held Brad's arm securely behind his back, applying enough pressure to keep the aggressive man entirely immobilized. Brad let out a pathetic yelp, his face pressed against the floorboards. His perfectly tailored suit was now wrinkled around his shoulders. His pristine image was shattered in front of the very community he had been trying to manipulate all morning. For a long, tense moment, absolutely nobody moved. The church deacons stared at him in utter disbelief. Chloe shrieked from the stage but made no move to help her husband. I stood there looking down at him with a cold, detached amusement. This was the man who had called me worthless. Now he was eating dust at my feet. "Let him up, David," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent hall. "We do not want him to claim we ruined his cheap suit." David released his grip immediately, stepping back and folding his hands professionally in front of him. Brad scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His face was purple with absolute rage and humiliation. He frantically adjusted his jacket, trying to regain some dignity. He glared at me, pointing a shaking finger. "You are going to pay for this." "Maya," he screamed, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the room watching him. "You have no idea who I am. I run a multi-million-dollar portfolio. I know the executive board members at your firm personally. I play golf with the men who sign your paychecks. I will have you fired by Monday morning for assaulting me. You will be blacklisted from every financial institution and end up in the gutter. He puffed out his chest, trying to project authority. He wanted everyone in the room to remember his fabricated power. He wanted my mother and sister to see him as the ultimate protector who was putting the rebellious daughter back in her place. I tilted my head back and laughed loudly. The sound of my laughter was sharp, echoing across the quiet church hall. It was a deep, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated mockery. The sound cut right through Brad's aggressive posturing, completely deflating his attempt to terrorize me. The congregation watched me in stunned fascination. They had never seen a black woman stand up to a wealthy, arrogant white man with such effortless confidence in this sanctuary before. Brad stood there, his mouth opening and closing as my laughter washed over him, exposing the absolute absurdity of his threats. "You are going to have me fired, Brad," I asked, wiping a fake tear from my eye. "You claim you know my board of directors? Do you even know the name of the firm where I work? Have you ever actually stepped foot inside a legitimate corporate headquarters? Or do you just watch finance movies and memorize the dialogue to impress your mother-in-law? You walk into this sanctuary posing as a financial savior, handing out unsolicited investment advice to people who have worked hard for every single penny they own. You act like a master of the universe. So let us test that brilliance right here and right now." I stepped out from behind the sound table, closing the distance between us, until I was standing just a few feet away from his trembling figure. "Tell us about this multi-million-dollar portfolio you supposedly manage, Brad." I challenged, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Name the primary growth assets. What was your quarterly yield last month? What is your debt-to-equity ratio? Who are your primary institutional investors? You love to brag about your vast wealth to my family, so do not be shy now. Give the congregation a free masterclass in wealth management. Go ahead, Brad. We are all eagerly waiting for your brilliant financial insights." Brad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The aggressive Wall Street wolf had instantly transformed into a cornered, frightened animal. He stuttered, making a pathetic stammering sound as his eyes darted wildly around the room. He looked at the deacons, who were now crossing their arms and frowning at him. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at him with wide, panicked eyes from the stage. He looked back at me, his forehead shining with a thick layer of nervous sweat. "Well, Brad," I prompted, raising an eyebrow. "We are waiting. Is it blue chip stocks? Municipal bonds? Maybe international real estate? Come on, genius, dazzle us with your portfolio metrics." I cannot discuss client confidentiality," he finally stammered out, offering the weakest, most pathetic excuse imaginable. His voice was barely a whisper compared to the booming authority he tried to project just minutes earlier. The entire fellowship hall let out a collective groan of disgust. The facade was entirely broken. Everyone in the room could see right through him. He was not a financial guru. He was a cowardly fraud trying to hide behind empty corporate jargon. "You cannot discuss it because it does not exist," I said, delivering the blow with chilling precision. "Your entire life is nothing but smoke and mirrors, designed to trick my desperate family into treating you like royalty." But smoke clears, Brad, and mirrors eventually shatter into pieces. I turned slightly and gestured toward David, who had remained standing silently in the shadows. David nodded and walked over to a heavy leather briefcase resting on a nearby pew. He picked it up and brought it directly to me, placing it squarely on the folding table. The metallic snap of the briefcase latch's opening echoed sharply through the tense quiet of the church hall. I looked at Brad, my smile freezing into something lethal and absolute. "Let us talk about your actual portfolio right now, Brad." Brad took a hesitant step forward, his eyes locked onto the documents. His chest was rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. He knew what kind of files looked like that. I did not even look at him. I simply nodded my head to David. My head of security reached into the briefcase and pulled out the first handful of dossiers. "Distribute these to the front row, please," I instructed calmly. "Make sure Pastor Jenkins gets a copy." Brad panicked. He lunged forward, reaching out with trembling hands to stop David. You cannot do this, Brad shouted, his voice cracking with absolute terror. That is proprietary financial information. It is highly illegal for you to possess or distribute those documents. David easily sidestepped the desperate man and began handing the folders to the eager congregation members. Let us talk about legality, Brad, I said, projecting my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. You stand up here and tell these good, hardworking people that you are a master of wealth creation. But the truth is printed right there in black and white for everyone to see. I pointed to the open folders in the hands of the deacons. Turn to page 2, please, I directly instructed the audience. You will see the official tax filings and corporate registry for Brad's supposedly elite investment firm. Pastor Jenkins slowly adjusted his reading glasses, his face turning pale as he scanned the spreadsheet. The numbers printed on that page were in bright, glaring red ink. Your boutique investment firm went entirely bankrupt 2 whole years ago, Brad, I announced coldly. You have absolutely zero institutional investors. You have zero corporate clients. You have not generated a single dime of actual revenue in 24 months. Your business license is currently suspended due to unpaid state taxes. You are drowning in vendor lawsuits and massive credit card debt. You are not a Wall Street wolf, Brad. You are a broke, unemployed fraud wearing a suit you cannot actually afford. Brad was visibly sweating profusely now. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic stutter emerged. Chloe stood frozen on the stage, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror as the congregation began to mutter in deep disgust. If he is completely bankrupt, then how is he paying for everything? An aunt from the second row suddenly called out, holding up her copy of the dossier. How did he buy that brand new sports car sitting in the parking lot? How is Chloe wearing those giant diamond rings today? That is a fantastic question, I replied, turning my sharp gaze toward my mother and father. I recommend everyone turn to page 4 of the dossier to find that exact answer. People eagerly flipped the pages, their eyes widening as they absorbed the horrifying reality of the Vance family finances. I watched my father's face contort in confusion as he looked at the document in the pastor's hands. Page 4 details the systematic draining of Marcus and Brenda's primary retirement accounts. I explained loudly, ensuring my parents heard every single word. Over the past 24 months, Brad and Chloe have been quietly bleeding my parents' life savings completely dry. They bled you dry to fund their fake lifestyle while letting you sit in a public hospital ward. The church erupted into absolute chaos. Relatives shouted in anger, pointing accusing fingers at Chloe and Brad. Chloe began to cry genuine tears of panic, shaking her head violently and denying everything. Brad took another step backward, looking desperately for an exit that David was currently blocking. Then Brenda snapped. She could not handle the public humiliation of her golden child being exposed as a parasite. She marched right to the edge of the stage, her face twisted in pure denial. "You are a liar!" Maya Brenda screamed, pointing a furious finger at my face. "You fabricated every single piece of this garbage just to ruin your sister's happiness. Brad is a financial genius. He has been taking care of our investments beautifully. He is making us richer than ever." The congregation stared at her, realizing she was completely delusional. But Brenda refused to back down. She puffed out her chest, determined to prove my documents wrong. In fact, Brad just secured a massive corporate loan to expand his firm. Brenda announced proudly, her voice ringing with arrogant triumph. He just got approved for $500,000 in liquid capital. A prestigious corporate bank reviewed his portfolio and gave him $500,000 just yesterday. You do not get that kind of money if you are bankrupt. I raised an eyebrow, feigning polite curiosity. Is that so? I asked softly. A massive corporate loan from a prestigious institution. How very impressive. Tell me, Mom, what is the name of this highly respected bank that gave your brilliant son-in-law $500,000? Brenda smiled a nasty, victorious smile, thinking she had finally beaten me. It is called Vanguard Trust, she declared loudly, making sure the entire church heard the name. They are a massive firm in New York City, and they practically begged Brad to take their money. I let the name echo through the silent church hall. Vanguard Trust. I let the two words hang in the heavy air. I looked directly at Brenda, watching her smug expression. Then I shifted my gaze to Brad. His face had suddenly gone completely paper white. All the blood drained from his cheeks. His eyes widened in absolute terror. He stopped breathing. Vanguard Trust. I repeated, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper that carried through the dead, quiet room. You mean my company? The very one you both tried to defraud just yesterday. The words hung in the sanctuary air, completely suffocating the remaining arrogance right out of Brad. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping hard into the edge of the wooden altar. His mouth gaped open like a fish out of water, but his vocal cords absolutely refused to function. Brenda shook her head violently, causing her elaborate church hat to slip sideways. She grabbed the microphone stand, as if she needed it to keep from collapsing entirely. That is a filthy lie, Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the stained glass windows. You are a low-level number cruncher living in a tiny apartment. You do not own a massive corporate bank. Vanguard Trust is a billion-dollar institution. They handle elite portfolios. You are just trying to embarrass my successful son-in-law because you are deeply jealous of his wealth. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the stage. The heavy silence in the room amplified the sharp click of my designer heels against the hardwood floor. I looked directly at the pastor and the deacons, who were still holding the thick financial dossiers my security team had handed them. I am not a low-level accountant, I announced, my voice projecting with crystal-clear authority. I am the managing partner and the absolute majority shareholder of Vanguard Trust. I own the very institution that Brad thought he was scamming. When his desperate fraudulent loan application crossed the desk of my junior analysts, they immediately flagged it for severe risk. Any normal bank would have thrown his pathetic paperwork straight into the garbage incinerator. But when my executive assistant brought it to my private office and I saw the names on the application, I decided to personally intervene. I approved the loan myself. I authorized the release of $500,000 of my own company funds directly into Brad's business accounts. Chloe let out a strangled gasp. She looked at Brad, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization. Brad, you told me you met with a board of older white men. Chloe cried out, her voice shaking. You said they took you out to a steakhouse and practically begged you to take their capital. Brad squeezed his eyes shut, unable to look at his wife. He had lied to her just like he lied to everyone else in this room. He never met with any board of directors, I explained smoothly. He filled out an online application and forged financial statements to make his bankrupt company look viable. But I did not care about his fake business metrics. I only cared about the collateral he used to secure the money. I turned my attention back to Brenda, whose face was rapidly losing all of its color. When a bank gives out a high-risk commercial loan, they require a tangible asset to guarantee the money. I continued, my tone shifting into a cold, professional cadence. Brad did not have any assets. His cars are leased and his firm is drowning in massive debt. So he and Chloe used the only thing of actual value they had access to. They used your fully paid-off 5-bedroom house in Atlanta as the sole collateral for the loan. Brenda gasped, grabbing her chest. Marcus, who had been sitting frozen in his wheelchair, suddenly gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He glared at Brad with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. You put my house up for a loan, Marcus roared, his voice hoarse and raw. You used the roof over my head for your failed business. Brad finally found a tiny shred of his voice. I was going to pay it back, he stammered, wiping the heavy sweat from his forehead. It was just a temporary bridge loan. The market was about to turn. I just needed liquidity for a few weeks to close a major deal. You were never going to lose the house, Marcus. I swear I had it entirely under control. I laughed, a sharp cutting sound that made Brad flinch. Under control, I mocked, stepping right up to the edge of the stage. You are a terrible liar, Brad, and an even worse financial planner. You received the $500,000 transferred into your account last month. Your very first premium payment was due exactly 3 days ago. All you had to do was make one simple payment to keep the loan in good standing. But what did you do instead? You walked into a luxury jeweler and bought Chloe that massive diamond necklace she is wearing right now to show off at this birthday party. You bought a luxury watch for yourself. You booked a ski trip to Aspen. You blew through the capital to maintain your fake wealthy lifestyle, and you completely missed your very first payment. Chloe instinctively brought her hand up to cover the glittering diamonds resting against her collarbone. She stared at her husband in absolute horror, realizing that her precious jewelry was bought with the deed to her parents' home. According to the strict terms of the contract you signed, Brad, I stated, my voice dropping into a lethal register. A single missed payment triggers an immediate and irreversible default clause. There is no grace period. There is no negotiation. By failing to pay the premium, you automatically forfeited the collateral to Vanguard Trust. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my emerald green suit jacket. I pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of legal paper folded perfectly into thirds. I flicked my wrist, snapping the document open, and held it up for the entire congregation to see. The bold red seal of a certified legal foreclosure was stamped prominently at the top. I walked over to Brenda and held the document right in front of her trembling face. I now own your house, Mom, I said, delivering the ultimate checkmate. You have exactly 48 hours to pack. The heavy silence following my declaration crashed upon the church like a collapsing roof. Brenda stared at the bright red foreclosure stamp on the legal document I held. Her eyes were unblinking. The reality pierced her delusion. She was losing her prestigious address. She was losing her country club lifestyle. She was losing the brick house she used to measure her superiority over everyone. I watched her manicured fingers tremble, reaching to touch the paper as if it would make it disappear. I pulled the document back, folding it neatly and sliding it into my green suit jacket. Marcus sat paralyzed in his wheelchair at the base of the altar. The stroke had robbed him of his right side, but the absolute betrayal of his golden child and perfect white son-in-law paralyzed his mind. He looked up at the cross hanging above the choir loft, then turned to look at Chloe, the daughter he praised all morning, the daughter he sacrificed my life to protect. The daughter who secretly took the roof from over his head to buy diamond jewelry while he sat helpless in a hospital bed. A low guttural sound rumbled from deep inside my father's chest. It was a raw sound of heartbreak and furious rage. He gripped the armrest of his wheelchair with his one good hand. His knuckles turned white from intense pressure. He used every ounce of strength left in his weakened body to push himself upward. He leaned heavily on his left leg, swaying precariously, forcing himself into a standing position. Brenda screamed his name, reaching to steady him, but he shoved her hand away violently. Chloe took a hesitant step toward him, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Daddy, please let me explain," she begged, holding her hands up in a pleading motion. "We were going to fix it. We were going to pay it back before you found out." Marcus did not want an explanation. He swung his good left arm with startling speed and force. The loud crack of his open palm striking Chloe's cheek echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. The physical blow sent Chloe stumbling backward. She tripped over the hem of her yellow silk dress and collapsed onto the carpeted steps of the stage. She grabbed her face, sobbing hysterically. "You ungrateful, evil parasite!" Marcus roared, his voice breaking under his fury. "I gave you everything I had. I gave you the best education. I gave you a wedding fit for a queen. I pushed your sister away because she was an inconvenience to your perfect life, and this is how you repay me. You steal the home I built with my bare hands to feed this pathetic, broke loser." Marcus turned his rage toward Brad. The arrogant commercial broker actually shrank backward, terrified of a disabled old man. "You come into my house," Marcus spat. "You sit at my dinner table acting like you are doing us a favor by marrying my daughter. You told me our wealth was protected. You told me my investments were safe. You are a disgusting thief. You are a cowardly boy playing dress-up in a suit you stole from my retirement fund." The pristine facade of the Vance family shattered into jagged pieces right in front of the congregation. It was a spectacular implosion. 200 people watched as the Golden family tore each other to shreds at the altar. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her cheek glowing bright red. She pointed an accusing finger at Brad, abandoning her devoted wife routine. "This is all your fault," she screamed. "You told me the loan was approved by your elite board members. You told me I deserved that necklace. You ruined my life, Brad. You promised me wealth and status, and now I'm going to be homeless because you are a complete failure." Brad snapped. The pressure of public humiliation and impending financial ruin completely destroyed his fake charm. He sneered at his wife, looking at her with total disgust. "You are the one who demanded the lifestyle. Chloe," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You demanded the luxury cars. You demanded the five-star vacations. You refused to get a job. You bled me dry long before I touched your parents' miserable house. You are a spoiled, useless brat, and I am done covering for your massive spending habits." Brenda let out a horrified wail. She rushed forward, trying to physically push Brad away from her daughter. "You get out of my church!" Brenda cried, hitting his chest with her fists. "You ruined my family. We are going to sue you for every penny you have." Brad laughed, a sharp, manic sound. "Sue me with what money, Brenda? You have nothing left. Your house belongs to your other daughter. Now I am out of here. I am not going down with this pathetic sinking ship." Brad violently shoved his mother-in-law backward. Brenda stumbled and fell onto the front pew, gasping for air. Brad did not look back at Chloe, who was weeping loudly on the floor. He abandoned his wife and in-laws without a second thought. He turned around and sprinted down the center aisle of the church, desperate to escape the consequences of his actions. He ran like a terrified child, leaving behind the mess he created. He reached the heavy double doors at the back of the fellowship hall. He grabbed the brass handles and pulled hard. The doors did not move a single inch. He pulled again, throwing his body weight against the wood. They were locked tight. From the shadows of the vestibule, my private security team stepped forward, blocking the exit completely. David folded his massive arms across his chest, looking down at the panicked white man. I walked slowly down the aisle, stopping a few feet behind him. I smiled, my voice carrying through the church. "You cannot leave yet, Brad. We have a special guest arriving." Brad pressed his back against the locked, heavy wooden doors of the church. He looked absolutely pathetic, trapped between the unforgiving exit and my head of security. He was trembling uncontrollably. David did not move a single muscle, simply standing there as an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark fabric. I did not even need to raise a finger against my brother-in-law anymore. His punishment was already in motion. I turned my back on his trembling figure and shifted my entire focus back to the front of the sanctuary, where the real tragedy of the Vance family was unfolding in spectacular fashion. The special guest I had promised Brad was not a person, but the cold, unavoidable arrival of absolute ruin. It was settling over the room like a thick, suffocating blanket of smoke. On the stage, my younger sister Chloe was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant golden child who had paraded around the fellowship hall, flashing her diamond rings and demanding I sit at the singles table, was entirely gone. In her place was a broken, weeping mess collapsed on the carpeted steps. Her bright yellow silk dress was wrinkled and stained with her own tears. Heavy black mascara and expensive foundations smeared across her face in ugly dark streaks, running down her cheeks and dripping onto her collarbone. She slapped the floor with her bare hands, screaming about her ruined future and her failed marriage. She was sobbing so violently that her entire body shook, gasping for air between loud, pathetic wails. Chloe looked frantically around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face among the deacons and aunts who used to adore her. She found absolutely nothing but cold judgment and sheer disgust. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody offered her a tissue. The congregation simply stared at her, realizing she was a selfish, spoiled woman who had willingly gambled away her parents' home to fund a fake life of luxury. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as her perfect world dissolved into pure ash. Brenda stood frozen near the front pew, watching her youngest daughter completely break down. My mother slowly turned her head, taking in the faces of the community she had spent decades trying to impress. She saw the pastor looking at her with deep sorrow and righteous anger. She saw her oldest friends whispering to each other, shaking their heads at the massive financial and moral fraud she had helped conceal. The pristine religious facade she had maintained for 60 years was completely destroyed. Everyone in this building now knew she had denied her sick daughter basic care while blindly funding a narcissistic white con artist. Brenda looked at Marcus slumping in his wheelchair, his face a mask of furious devastation. She finally realized that they had nothing left. The money was gone, the fake prestige was gone, the respect of their church was gone. And most terrifying of all, the house they had lived in for 30 years now legally belonged to the very daughter she had just publicly humiliated. The gravity of her total failure crashed into her with the force of a speeding train. Her knees buckled. Brenda dropped to the floor of the sanctuary, abandoning every last ounce of her false pride and arrogant dignity. The proud matriarch who had judged everyone else was now completely shattered in front of the very community she had tried to manipulate. She crawled forward on the polished hardwood, her expensive church dress dragging awkwardly behind her. She moved directly toward me, her hands outstretched, her face twisted in pure, naked desperation. "Maya," she wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her total humiliation. "Maya, please wait." She reached me and threw her arms forward, grabbing handfuls of the fabric of my custom emerald green suit. I looked down at her, feeling a strange, clinical detachment as her tears soaked into the expensive material near my knees. I did not step away, but I did not offer her a single shred of comfort. "Take the huge house," Brenda sobbed loudly, ensuring the entire room could hear her ultimate emotional blackmail. "Take the house, Maya." "I do not care about the property anymore. We will move out today. But please, you have to listen to me. Your father is dying. He needs specialized medical care that we can no longer afford because of what Brad did. Marcus needs to be admitted to the Oakwood Rehab Center. It is the only medical facility in the entire state that has the advanced neurological equipment that can cure his paralysis." Brenda tightened her grip on my suit, her knuckles white as she looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. She was playing her final desperate card, hoping my conscience would save them from the disaster they had created. "We have zero insurance money left." Maya Brenda cried, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent church hall. "The out-of-pocket costs for Oakwood are astronomical. We cannot pay for it, and if he goes to a public ward, he will never walk again. I am begging you on my hands and knees in front of God and everyone here. You have millions of dollars. You own Vanguard Trust. You have the absolute power to fix this right now. Please, Maya, pay for your father's rehabilitation. I beg you, save his life." I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic loud wails echo off the brightly stained glass windows. The scent of her heavy floral perfume mixed with the smell of her nervous sweat made me feel entirely disgusted by her presence. I looked at the woman who had told me to deal with my own cancer 3 years ago, now begging me to save her husband. I slowly bent my knees, crouching down until my face was perfectly level with hers. I leaned in extremely close until my lips were just an inch away from her ear. "Oakwood Rehab," I whispered slowly. "Oakwood Rehab," I repeated, letting the syllables roll slowly off my tongue. My face remained perfectly level with her tear-streaked makeup. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for any lingering trace of maternal authority. There was absolutely nothing left but pure, unfiltered terror. I did not keep my voice lowered for long. I reached down and picked up the stage microphone that Brenda had dropped earlier. The heavy metal casing felt cool and solid in my grip. I stood up, towering over the woman who gave birth to me. I raised the microphone to my lips, ensuring that every single person in the sanctuary would hear my final verdict. "I am highly familiar with the Oakwood Rehabilitation Center," I announced, my voice echoing powerfully off the vaulted ceiling and the stained glass windows. "In fact, I know their internal operations intimately. I know their cutting-edge neurological units. I know their world-class physical therapists. And I know their strict admission protocols." I paused, letting my words settle over the breathless congregation. Brenda looked up at me, her hands still clutching the fabric of my green suit. her eyes wide with a sudden desperate hope. She actually thought I was going to agree to save them. She thought my knowledge of the facility meant I was going to pull out my checkbook and rescue my father from the consequences of his own financial negligence. I shattered that pathetic delusion with a single sentence. I am on the board of directors at Oakwood, I stated coldly. The collective gasp from the church crowd was audible. I stared directly down at my mother, watching the tiny spark of hope in her eyes instantly extinguish. My father submitted an emergency application for a specialized recovery bed 3 days ago. I continued methodically detailing the administrative process. The social worker sent his medical files to our admissions committee, pleading for charity because his son-in-law gambled away his funds. Our board met this morning to review the application, and I personally denied his request. My words hit Brenda with the force of a physical blow. She released my suit jacket as if the fabric had suddenly caught fire. She collapsed backward onto the hard wooden floor, her hands flying to her throat. She began to hyperventilate, gasping for air in loud wheezes. Her chest heaved violently as her brain struggled to process the absolute finality of my statement. She was not just losing her house. She was losing the only medical lifeline available to her husband. And the person severing that lifeline was the daughter she had treated like garbage for 35 years. In the front pew, Marcus slumped heavily in his wheelchair. The furious fire that had animated him just moments ago when he slapped Chloe was completely gone. The fight entirely left his broken body. He looked down at his paralyzed right hand, a stark reminder of his physical vulnerability. He finally understood the magnitude of his total defeat. He traded his loyal daughter for a fraudulent white son-in-law and a spoiled golden child. Now he was going to spend the rest of his declining years in a substandard public medical ward because the daughter he threw away held the keys to his salvation and absolutely refused to open the door. Brenda scrambled to her knees, sobbing hysterically. "Maya, you cannot do this!" she wailed, her voice shrill and broken. "He is your father. He gave you life. You cannot sentence him to a public hospital. It is a death sentence for a man in his condition. You have the money. You have the power. You are his flesh and blood. You owe him this chance to recover." I looked at her with pure clinical detachment, feeling absolutely no pity or guilt. The fire that helped me survive chemotherapy had burned away all my familial obligations. "You made your choice 3 years ago, Brenda," I said, my voice slicing through her pathetic sobbing. "When I was lying in an oncology ward poisoned by chemicals and terrified of dying, I begged you for help. I asked for my mother and father to hold my hand. You told me my cancer was an inconvenience. You told me to handle my own potential death because you needed to pay for Chloe's luxury country club reception. You chose a wedding over my life." I pointed a sharp, manicured finger toward the stage where Chloe was still curled in a weeping heap of yellow silk. "You wanted a perfect wedding." I continued, my tone devoid of any mercy. "You wanted the giant diamond rings. You wanted the status symbol of a wealthy white son-in-law to parade around this church. You sacrificed my life to fund her illusion, so now you get to deal with the reality." I leaned forward slightly, delivering the coldest reality check of her entire life. "Go ask Chloe to save him," I commanded. "Tell your golden child to take off the diamond necklace she bought with your mortgage. Tell her to sell her designer shoes and her expensive handbags. Tell her to march down to a pawn shop and sell her gorgeous white wedding dress to pay for his medical care. Let Chloe's wedding dress save his life today, because my bank account is closed to you." Brenda let out a soul-crushing scream, covering her ears as the absolute truth destroyed her. The congregation watched in stunned awe. Nobody stepped forward to defend them. The moral reckoning was too powerful and too justified. I turned my back on my weeping mother, feeling profound closure. The revenge was complete. But just as I began to step away, a sudden shift in the atmosphere caught my attention. The bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the large stained glass windows was suddenly interrupted. Intense flashing beams of bright blue and vivid red lights began to rapidly bounce across the church walls, illuminating the shocked faces of the congregation. The flashing blue and red lights painted the sanctuary in chaotic colors. Pastor Jenkins took a sudden step backward from his wooden pulpit. The heavy oak doors at the back of the fellowship hall swung open with a loud thud that shook the floorboards. Two men wearing sharp dark suits walked in holding up golden badges reflecting the overhead lights. Behind them stood four local police officers in full uniform, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy duty belts. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern, uncompromising face, scanned the completely silent room. His voice boomed over the sound of my mother's quiet, pathetic sobbing. "We are looking for Bradley Vance," the agent announced loud and clear. The congregation instantly parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, clear physical path directly to where my arrogant brother-in-law was currently standing. Brad was suddenly paralyzed. His face turned a sickly pale shade of gray. The confident investment broker who loved to boast about his elite connections was now visibly shaking so hard his tailored suit vibrated. He looked wildly around the church, desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. David and my private security team stepped aside, letting the federal agents pass through smoothly. "What is the absolute meaning of this?" Brad demanded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, terrified squeal. "You cannot just come barging into a church sanctuary like this. I have rights and I demand to call my lawyer immediately." The lead FBI agent did not slow his deliberate pace. "Bradley Vance, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and severe identity theft," the agent stated coldly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his leather belt. Brad stumbled backward, practically tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. "Fraud," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "This is entirely her fault. She gave me the money, she intentionally approved the loan. I am a perfectly legitimate businessman." I turned around to fully face him, folding my arms tightly across my emerald green designer suit. "You are a highly documented criminal, Brad," I corrected him, my voice ringing with absolute chilling clarity. "When you submitted that fraudulent commercial loan application to Vanguard Trust, you crossed state lines electronically. You knowingly submitted fabricated tax returns and completely fake asset portfolios. But your absolute biggest and most fatal mistake was the collateral. You illegally forged Marcus and Brenda's official signatures on that property deed. You willingly submitted falsified legal documents to a federally insured financial institution simply to steal $500,000. That is not just a bad business deal going wrong. That is a massive federal crime carrying a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 20 years. I did not just approve your loan to take my parents' house, I deliberately approved it to permanently establish the undeniable legal paper trail of your immense wire fraud. The exact moment the funds finally cleared your empty bank account, my elite legal team handed your entire unredacted file directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The devastating reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence crashed heavily down onto Brad's shoulders. His knees buckled instantly, giving out entirely. The arrogant white savior who loved to talk down to my black family completely dissolved into a pathetic weeping child right before our eyes. He dropped to his knees right in front of the holy altar, tears streaming rapidly down his flushed face. He scrambled forward toward his wife, grabbing the bottom hem of her wrinkled yellow silk dress. "Chloe, you have to tell them the truth," Brad sobbed hysterically, burying his wet face against her bare legs. "Tell them we did this major scam together. Tell them it was your brilliant idea to forge the signatures to pay for your massive diamond jewelry and the luxury Aspen trip. Tell your parents to drop the criminal charges. Tell them you will bail me out of jail right now. Please, Chloe, you have to save my life. I cannot survive going to a federal prison." Chloe looked down at her crying husband with absolute terror and pure revulsion. The selfish woman who had promised to love him through richer or poorer took one look at the waiting handcuffs and chose to save herself. She kicked her leg out violently, forcefully breaking his desperate grip on her expensive ruined dress. "Get away from me," Chloe shrieked, backing away from him rapidly as if he were covered in deadly venom. "I have absolutely nothing to do with your disgusting illegal business practices. I never signed fake documents. You maliciously lied to me, Brad. You told me you were incredibly rich and powerful. I am absolutely not going to sit in a filthy jail cell for your pathetic amateur mistakes. Do not ever attempt to speak to me again. Brad wailed loudly in absolute mental agony as his beloved wife threw him under the bus to save her own shallow skin. He reached out a trembling hand toward Brenda, hoping for mercy, but my mother turned her face away, entirely consumed by her catastrophic ruin. He had absolutely nobody left in his corner. The FBI agent stepped forward, grabbing his arms and hauling him to his feet. They twisted his arms tightly behind his back. The metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly through the silent sanctuary. Brad cried out for mercy, begging the pastor to pray for his soul. The congregation simply stared back at him in pure disgust, offering zero sympathy. The officers marched him down the center aisle, dragging him past the people he had tried to impress all morning. His scuffed shoes dragged against the red carpet as he wept loudly, his face swollen with ultimate humiliation. The heavy wooden doors closed firmly behind him, cutting off his pathetic cries and leaving the completely and utterly ruined remains of my toxic family standing at the altar. Pastor Jenkins stepped back up to the wooden podium. His face was a mask of profound disappointment and righteous anger. He reached down and picked up the microphone that Brenda had dropped earlier. He did not offer a prayer for my mother. He did not ask the congregation to bow their heads in a gentle moment of healing grace. Instead, he looked directly at Brenda and Marcus with a stern, uncompromising glare. The entire sanctuary held its collective breath, waiting for his spiritual verdict. When Pastor Jenkins finally spoke, his voice boomed with absolute divine authority. God sees absolutely everything we do in the dark, he announced, his words striking like a heavy hammer. You cannot hide your sins behind expensive clothes and country club memberships. You cannot use this holy sanctuary as a stage to perform your fake righteousness while actively destroying your own flesh and blood. You sacrificed your sick daughter for a flashy wedding, and then you lied to this entire community about it. You brought a fraudulent criminal into our church and tried to present him as a savior. We do not tolerate that kind of profound spiritual rot in this congregation. Brenda let out a loud, pathetic gasp, covering her face with her trembling hands. She looked desperately toward the front rows, hoping for a single ounce of sympathy from the women she had gossiped with for the last 30 years. She got absolutely nothing in return. The older church mothers who had previously shaken their heads at me now turned their backs completely on my mother. Aunts and uncles who had eagerly eaten her catered food just an hour ago stood up from their wooden pews. One by one, they physically turned away from the stage in utter disgust. The absolute social ostracization was immediate and brutal. Marcus sat in his wheelchair looking completely shattered as his lifelong friends refused to even make eye contact with him. They were entirely excommunicated from the only community that had ever given them any real social standing. The pristine reputation they had sacrificed my life to maintain was now permanently reduced to ashes. Brenda tried to reach out to the choir director, a woman she had known since childhood, but the woman simply gathered her purse and walked out the side door without uttering a single word of comfort. The painful message was incredibly clear and completely undeniable to everyone. The entire congregation had collectively decided to banish them from their spiritual home forever. The harsh rejection was absolute and left them entirely isolated in a massive room full of their closest peers. Chloe realized the full magnitude of her horrific situation. Her fraudulent husband was currently sitting in the back of a federal police cruiser. Her parents were completely bankrupt and publicly disgraced. She had no money, no home, and no future. The spoiled golden child crawled forward on the carpeted stage, dragging her ruined yellow silk dress behind her. She reached out her manicured hands toward my custom emerald green suit. "Maya, please," Chloe sobbed hysterically, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "You have to help me, Maya. You are the managing partner of a massive financial firm. You have millions of dollars and a huge penthouse. You can give me an entry-level job at your company. You can let me stay in your guest room just until I get back on my feet. I will do anything you ask me to do. I will clean your floors. I will fetch your coffee. Please, Maya, do not leave me out on the street with absolutely nothing. We are sisters. You have to save me. I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman clutching the edge of the stage. This was the exact same sister who had mocked my post-mastectomy body. The same sister who had demanded I sit at the singles table just an hour ago to hide me from her wealthy fake husband. I felt no triumph in her tears, just a cold, clinical emptiness. I did not speak a single word to her. I did not kick her away or scream in her face. I simply stepped back, breaking her weak, desperate grasp on the air near my shoes. I completely ignored her existence, as if she were nothing more than a stray shadow on the floor. Her hysterical cries grew louder, but they meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I turned my back on the pathetic weeping mess of my former family, leaving them completely alone with the devastating consequences of their own toxic choices. The air in the church felt instantly lighter, the heavy, oppressive weight of their constant manipulation finally lifting off my shoulders for good. Every single piece of their arrogant empire had been systematically dismantled and destroyed by the exact same daughter they had carelessly discarded. They had built their entire existence solely on a foundation of lies, and now they were buried underneath the rubble. I felt an incredible surge of profound peace slowly wash over my mind and my entire physical body. The incredibly exhausting and deeply painful chapter of seeking their validation was now officially and permanently closed forever. I signaled to David and my security team to clear the path forward. They stepped aside, forming a protective wall between me and the chaotic wreckage I had just orchestrated. I began to walk down the center aisle of the sanctuary, my designer heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the polished hardwood floor. The congregation parted respectfully, letting me pass through in absolute silence. I did not look back at the altar even once. I reached the front vestibule and pushed the heavy brass handles of the main exit. The large wooden doors swung open, revealing the bright, blinding afternoon sunlight pouring down from the clear blue sky. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling completely reborn and entirely ready to embrace my beautiful new life moving forward. I stood at the top of the wide concrete steps of Mount Zion Community Church, letting the heavy brass doors swing shut behind me. The click of the latch locking into place sounded like a definitive period at the end of a long sentence. The chaotic screaming of my ruined family was instantly cut off by thick wood and stained glass. I closed my eyes and tilted my head back, letting the bright Sunday sunlight wash over my face. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs, expanding my chest with a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in 35 years, I was not bracing myself for criticism. I was not shrinking my accomplishments to make a white brother-in-law feel superior. I was not twisting myself into knots trying to earn maternal affection from a woman whose heart was a closed bank account. I was just Maya. I was brilliant, I was wealthy, I was entirely free. I raised my right hand and pressed my palm flat against my chest, right over the fabric of my emerald green suit. Beneath the expensive Italian silk layered under my skin rested the faint raised scar of my chemotherapy port. That small, jagged mark was the daily reminder of my mortality and my ultimate resilience. 3 years ago, I had laid in a sterile hospital bed stripped of my energy and my naive belief in unconditional family love. When Marcus and Brenda abandoned me to fund Chloe's lavish country club wedding, they unknowingly gave me the greatest gift of my life. They gave me the gift of pure, unadulterated rage. That burning anger became my absolute lifeline. When the toxic chemicals made me too weak to stand, the sheer spite of wanting to outlive their betrayal forced me out of bed. That anger fueled my 80-hour work weeks. It sharpened my financial instincts. It drove me to build Vanguard Trust into a massive, unassailable financial empire. I used my deep resentment as rocket fuel to launch myself completely out of their toxic orbit. But as I stood there, bathing in the warm afternoon sun, I realized something incredibly profound had just shifted within my spirit. The heavy burning rage that had sustained me for 36 months was suddenly gone. Watching Brad get dragged out in federal handcuffs, watching Chloe weep over lost diamonds, watching Marcus and Brenda face destruction had finally extinguished the fire. I did not need the anger to keep me warm anymore. The heavy burden of being the unloved scapegoat, the rejected black daughter, who was never quite good enough, completely evaporated into the autumn breeze. It was replaced by a deep, untouchable peace. I had demanded justice, and the universe had delivered it with spectacular precision. I was no longer a victim seeking validation or a survivor seeking revenge. I was a conqueror who had just salted the earth of her enemies and was now walking away to build a beautiful kingdom. Just as I lowered my hand from my chest, the heavy wooden doors behind me rattled violently against their brass hinges. The door was yanked open just a crack. Maya the voice ripped through the quiet churchyard, raw and dripping with desperate, absolute panic. It was Brenda. My mother was standing in the dark vestibule, clutching the edge of the heavy door. "Maya, you cannot just leave us here," she screamed, her voice cracking horribly. "You have to come back inside. You have to fix this. We are your blood, Maya. I am your mother. You owe me." Her shrill voice carried across the parking lot, echoing off the brick walls of the sanctuary. It was the weapon of toxic families everywhere, throwing the word blood like a lasso to drag you back into abuse. A few years ago, that scream would have frozen me in my tracks. It would have forced me to turn around, apologize, and empty my bank accounts to make her stop crying. Today, I did not even flinch. I did not turn my head. I did not pause my breathing. Her desperate cries sounded exactly like a stranger shouting in a crowded room entirely disconnected from my reality. I recognized the scream for exactly what it was. It was not a mother crying out for her beloved child. It was a manipulative parasite wailing because it had just been violently severed from its host. She was not mourning the loss of a daughter. She was mourning the loss of a financial bailout. I kept my back perfectly straight, my shoulders relaxed, and my eyes fixed securely on the horizon. David, my head of security, walked down the concrete steps ahead of me. He moved toward the sleek black town car, waiting quietly at the curb. He opened the armored rear door and stood respectfully waiting for my signal. I walked down the remaining stairs with a smooth, effortless grace. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, blocking out the pathetic noise leaking from the heavy church doors. I reached the waiting vehicle and paused for a brief fraction of a second. I looked at David, who gave me a firm, knowing nod. "We are completely finished here, David," I said, my voice steady and light. "Inform the driver to take the scenic route back to the bustling city. I want to enjoy the beautiful view." David nodded, closing the heavy car door the exact second I slid into the plush leather seat. The thick tinted glass instantly muted the outside world. I settled back into the comfortable upholstery, letting out a long, satisfying exhale. The powerful engine purred quietly as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the church, my parents, and my sister completely in the rearview mirror. The toxic and painful chapter of the Addams family was now officially over. 6 months later, my life would look completely different, proving that the best revenge is always massive, undeniable success. The heavy winter melted away, giving rise to a bright and incredibly crisp spring morning in the heart of Brooklyn. I stood at the center of a massive marble courtyard, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial golden scissors. Exactly 6 months had passed since I walked out of that packed church and permanently closed the door on the toxic people who shared my DNA. Today, I was opening a completely different door. The rapid flash of news cameras illuminated the space as I looked up at the pristine glass facade of the newly constructed building. The bold silver lettering mounted above the grand entrance read, "The Vanguard Center for Oncology and Healing." I wore a tailored ivory designer suit that contrasted beautifully against my deep brown skin, projecting a serene and untouchable power. The large crowd gathered before me consisted of top hospital administrators, local city politicians, and respected community leaders who were eager to witness this historic dedication. I was not just cutting a ribbon today. I was establishing an absolute sanctuary for those who truly needed it. This state-of-the-art recovery wing was built exclusively to address the severe healthcare disparities faced by Black women battling aggressive cancer. When I was going through my own brutal rounds of chemotherapy 3 years ago, I saw firsthand how the cold medical system routinely ignored our pain and quickly dismissed our specific needs. I survived that terrifying ordeal completely alone, because my biological family viewed my illness as a massive inconvenience to their shallow country club lifestyle. I vowed right then that if I ever gained the power to change things, I would make sure absolutely no other Black woman would ever have to face that deep darkness without unparalleled support and genuine care. Now I finally had the ultimate power, and I funded the entire multi-million-dollar project using the most profoundly poetic money available on the planet. Every single dime used to construct this gorgeous facility came directly from the liquidated assets of my former family. When the federal authorities seized Brad's fraudulent investment accounts, his criminal capital was forcefully auctioned off by the government to pay restitution. I legally foreclosed on Marcus and Brenda's sprawling 5-bedroom estate, completely gutting the physical symbol of their massive arrogance and their fake superiority. I immediately sold their beloved luxury property to a commercial real estate developer for a massive profit. I took the very wealth they maliciously tried to steal from me and poured it entirely into a charitable foundation dedicated to saving vulnerable lives. I literally transformed their disgusting greed into a beacon of absolute healing and monumental hope for my community, ensuring their dark legacy was entirely erased. I turned my head and looked at the beautiful, radiant people standing proudly on the elevated stage right beside me. They were not connected to me by any shared blood, but they were securely bonded to me by absolute, unwavering loyalty. To my immediate right stood Clara, the fierce Jamaican oncology nurse, who used to hold my trembling hand and gently wipe my sweating forehead when the intense chemical nausea became too unbearable to manage alone. She was the one who bought me my very first silk headscarf when my hair fell out in heavy clumps onto my hospital pillow. Now she was the newly appointed Chief Director of Nursing for the entire Vanguard Recovery Wing, overseeing a massive staff of dedicated medical professionals. To my left stood my brilliant executive assistant, and my elite security head David, who had fearlessly shielded me from Brad's violent outbursts at the church. Standing closely behind us were dozens of vibrant, powerful Black women who were currently surviving their own fierce battles with various stages of cancer. They were my true chosen sisters, my genuine tribe. We shared a profound spiritual understanding that transcended basic genetics and familial obligation. My biological parents and my jealous sister Chloe were completely absent, and their complete absence did not leave a single void in my heart. Instead, it left a wide open, sunny space for genuine love and profound peace to flourish beautifully. I did not miss the constant, exhausting anxiety of trying to constantly please people who fundamentally despised my existence. I raised the heavy golden scissors high into the clear blue sky and sliced cleanly through the thick, shiny red ribbon. The large crowd erupted into thunderous applause and joyous ringing cheers that echoed across the entire bustling city block. I handed the golden scissors to Clara, pulling her into a tight, highly emotional embrace. We had successfully built something incredibly beautiful out of total familial devastation and profound personal triumph. As the loud applause slowly settled down, the aggressive press pool surged forward, eager to get a direct statement from the wealthy, mysterious benefactor who had just transformed the local medical landscape. A determined young reporter from a highly prominent local television news station forcefully pushed her way right to the front of the media pack, extending her branded microphone directly toward my face. The bright recording light on the heavy camera blinked rapidly, capturing my calm, confident expression for the live television broadcast. Miss Adams, the eager reporter, called out, her eyes shining with intense journalistic curiosity. "This is an absolutely monumental contribution to our growing city. I know that millions of people sitting at home watching this broadcast right now are deeply inspired by your truly unbelievable generosity and your remarkable resilience. Your private foundation has completely revolutionized medical recovery care for marginalized women today. However, we clearly notice that you are standing up here celebrating this historic personal milestone entirely without your parents or your younger sister present. The local public records show a highly publicized, devastating legal fallout involving your brother-in-law late last year, resulting in several severe federal criminal charges. Can you please tell us where your biological family is right now and exactly how they feel about your incredible and undeniable success today? As the bright flash of the reporter's cameras faded into the joyful afternoon, I found myself briefly reflecting on the universal law of consequence. For every beautiful structure built on a foundation of truth, there is an equally devastating collapse reserved for those who build their entire existence on a foundation of lies. The magnificent hospital wing standing behind me was a towering monument of healing, but its very bricks were paid for by the spectacular downfall of the people who tried to bury me. Justice, when it finally arrives, rarely asks for permission. It simply kicks in the front door with absolute force and collects every single heavy debt owed. The absolute most satisfying debt collected belonged to my extremely arrogant former brother-in-law. Brad always believed his race and his fabricated corporate charm made him completely untouchable in this world. He was currently learning the hard way just how aggressively the federal government disagreed with that ridiculous assumption. When the FBI raided his fake boutique investment firm, they found a massive mountain of forged documents, complex wired fraud schemes, and stolen assets. He absolutely did not get the luxurious white-collar resort prison he cried and pathetically begged for during his public sentencing hearing. The judge was completely disgusted by his attempt to steal the home of a disabled elderly man and handed down a mandatory 10-year sentence in a high-security federal penitentiary. The man who used to strut around family dinners in custom Italian suits, mocking my career and drinking expensive bourbon, now wears an oversized, scratchy orange jumpsuit. He spends his days scrubbing industrial cafeteria trays for 23 cents an hour. The fake Wall Street wolf was forcefully thrown into a cold cage with actual dangerous predators, and his arrogant smirk was permanently erased the exact moment those heavy iron gates slammed shut behind him forever. He sends desperate letters begging for money for the prison commissary. I simply use them as scrap paper to test my new expensive fountain pens. His perfectly devoted wife experienced an equally brutal descent from her fake self-appointed throne. Chloe always believed her light skin, her perfect blonde highlights, and her expensive diamond rings made her inherently superior to me. She lived her entire spoiled adult life, treating absolutely everyone around her like highly disposable servants. When Brad's assets were completely frozen by the federal government, her entire illusion of extreme wealth shattered overnight. The credit card companies came collecting, and she had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The golden child who refused to work a single day in her life because she was supposedly meant for high society is now currently working grueling double shifts at a greasy fast food drive-thru on the outskirts of Atlanta. She wears a cheap polyester uniform that constantly smells of old frying oil. Her perfect manicures have been entirely replaced by deep grease burns and cracked fingernails. The stress of dodging relentless debt collectors and working 14-hour days on her feet has completely stolen her manufactured beauty. She looks 10 years older than she actually is. Sometimes her old country club friends pull up to her drive-through window in their luxury SUVs. Chloe has to force a humiliating customer service smile and hand them their cheap value meals while they look at her with absolute pity and poorly concealed disgust. She has no rich husband to save her miserable life, and her broken parents cannot offer her a single dime. Speaking of my parents, their punishment was the most profoundly poetic of all. They traded my life for a wealthy facade and ended up with absolutely nothing. When I legally foreclosed on their massive 5-bedroom suburban estate, they were violently evicted from the affluent neighborhood they used to define their entire self-worth. With their retirement funds entirely drained by Brad, they were forced to move into a cramped 1-bedroom subsidized apartment in a highly undesirable part of the city. The thin walls offer zero privacy, and the outdated heating system barely works during the cold winter nights. Because I personally blocked his admission to the elite Oakwood Rehabilitation Center, Marcus relies exclusively on the most basic underfunded state medical care available. A designated state nurse visits for exactly 15 minutes a day, leaving Brenda to handle the grueling physical labor of lifting and bathing a partially paralyzed man all by herself. The heavy burden has aged my mother terribly. The vibrant church-going matriarch who loved to stand at the pulpit and demand everyone respect her fake piety is now completely isolated. Their entire church congregation permanently exiled them after hearing the audio recording of their cruelty. Their phones never ring. Nobody ever knocks on their chipped wooden door. They spend their endless miserable days trapped in a tiny sweltering room, staring at the peeling wallpaper and blaming each other for their total ruin. They have absolutely no visitors and zero prospects for a better future. The absolute peak of their daily misery happens right at 6 o'clock every single evening. They sit on a cheap, sagging sofa eating discount canned soup and turn on their tiny, outdated television set. Tonight they will not see a generic local news broadcast. Tonight the local anchor will cut to a live feed of me standing in front of the Vanguard Center for Oncology and Healing. They will watch their dark-skinned, discarded daughter wearing a stunning ivory designer suit being praised by city politicians and medical leaders. They will watch me smiling, surrounded by genuine love and profound respect. They will sit in their dark, cramped apartment and realize they threw away a brilliant, fiercely loyal daughter for a handful of fake diamonds and a fraudulent criminal. They will watch me living the beautiful, triumphant life they actively tried to destroy, and they will know deep in their bitter hearts that they are the sole architects of their own completely miserable hell. I sit in the quiet warmth of my Brooklyn penthouse, watching the city lights flicker to life across the East River. It is a stunning view, but the true beauty of my evening is the absolute silence. There are no frantic phone calls demanding my money. There are no passive-aggressive text messages from a mother who views me as a failure. There are no arrogant white brothers-in-law trying to steal my assets to fund their fake lifestyles. There is only me, my success, and my unshakable peace. Over the past 6 months, people have asked me how I sleep at night, knowing my biological parents are living in a cramped apartment and my sister is working at a drive-thru. They ask me how I can be so cold to my own flesh and blood. When they ask these questions, I do not feel guilt. I feel a deep, profound exhaustion with society and its dangerous obsession with biological obligation. From the time we are children, we are spoon-fed this toxic fairy tale that family is absolutely everything. We are told that blood is thicker than water and that we must endlessly forgive the people who share our DNA. In our community specifically, there is a massive cultural pressure to protect the family unit at all costs. We are expected to carry the heavy burdens of our parents, endure the jealousy of our siblings, and sweep generational trauma under the rug just to keep up appearances at church on Sunday. We are told to pray for those who hurt us and turn the other cheek when our relatives exploit our hard work. But what happens when the people who share your blood are the exact same people standing over your hospital bed telling you that your stage 3 cancer is an inconvenience to their country club aesthetic? What happens when your own mother looks at your mastectomy scars and tells you that you have no future left as a woman? What happens when your father tries to steal the inheritance you built from scratch simply because his golden child demands more diamond rings? I will tell you exactly what happens. You realize that the concept of unconditional family loyalty is the biggest and most dangerous scam ever sold to successful independent women. Blood does not automatically grant someone a permanent all-access pass to your life. DNA is simply a biological coincidence. It is not a binding contract that forces you to endure endless psychological abuse and financial exploitation. Respect is earned. Loyalty is built through mutually supportive actions. Love is demonstrated when you are at your absolute lowest point. The nurses who held my hand while I vomited from chemotherapy are my family. The security guard who protected me from a violent brother-in-law is my family. The colleagues who stepped up to help me build my private wealth management firm while I was entirely bald and exhausted are my family. We need to completely normalize walking away from highly toxic relatives without carrying a single ounce of guilt. There is a profound, unmatched power in looking your abusers straight in the eye and permanently revoking their access to your energy. You do not owe your success to people who actively prayed for your downfall. You do not owe your wealth to people who would gladly bankrupt you to fund their own illusions. When you work 80 hours a week to build an empire out of the ashes of your own suffering, you have an absolute moral obligation to fiercely protect that empire from parasites. It does not matter if those parasites share your last name or your facial features. A thief is a thief, and an abuser is an abuser. For years, I let my parents and my sister drain my spirit because I desperately wanted to fit into their perfect family portrait. I shrunk myself. I hid my professional achievements. I accepted their breadcrumbs of conditional affection because I was terrified of being the bad guy who tore the family apart. But the truth is, they tore the family apart the exact second they prioritized a wedding dress over my chemotherapy treatments. They broke the family bond when they decided my life was worth less than their social status. I simply held up a mirror to their disgusting behavior and let the harsh consequences of their own actions crush them. Walking away was the most terrifying thing I ever did, but it was also the single most empowering choice of my entire existence. You have to protect your peace with the same ruthless aggression that you used to build your success. Do not ever let anyone guilt you into breaking your own boundaries just to make a toxic relative feel comfortable. If someone brings absolute chaos, deceit, and disrespect into your life, you have every right to permanently change the locks on your door. Your hard-earned money, your mental health, and your physical sanctuary are sacred. You are not a rehabilitation center for broken, abusive family members. You are not a financial safety net for arrogant men who refuse to take accountability for their own massive failures. I look back at the vibrant Black woman I have become today, and I feel an overwhelming surge of gratitude. I survived a deadly disease, and I survived a deadlier family. The people who tried to bury me are now watching me soar higher than they could ever possibly comprehend. They thought my absence would be a temporary tantrum. They thought I would eventually come crawling back, begging for their approval. They never understood that I was not retreating. I was ascending. As I stand here tonight, looking out over the empire I built with my own two hands, I feel absolutely no sorrow for the empty seats at my dinner table. I look at my life, and I smile at the beautiful horizon. I did not lose my family. I excised a tumor. Letting them wallow in the miserable hell of their own creation is the most poetic justice I could ever possibly dare to ask for. I turn off my television screen and step away from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city lights of New York continue to glitter brightly below me, a beautiful reminder of the massive empire I built from the absolute bottom. I walk over to my plush velvet sofa and sit down, pouring myself a single glass of vintage red wine. I take a slow, measured sip, letting the rich flavor settle over my tongue. Now, I want to take a moment to look directly at you. Yes, you. The person sitting there watching this video or reading this story. I know exactly why you stayed until the very end of this journey. You did not just stay for the drama or the spectacular financial ruin of a fake Wall Street wolf. You stayed because somewhere deep inside your own chest, you recognized the exact same heavy pain that I carried for 35 years. You know exactly what it feels like to bend over backward for people who would not even cross the street to hand you a glass of water if you were dying of thirst. You understand the suffocating weight of conditional love and the exhausting performance required to keep toxic relatives comfortable. Society trains us to be perpetual martyrs for our families. We are aggressively conditioned to believe that walking away from abusive parents or jealous siblings is a mortal sin. People love to quote religious scriptures about forgiveness and honoring your father and mother. They conveniently forget the parts about parents not provoking their children to wrath or the universal law of reaping what you sow. For a very long time, I allowed that intense cultural guilt to keep me trapped in a vicious cycle of absolute misery. I truly believed that if I just achieved a little more success, if I just made a little more money, if I just smiled a little wider through their blatant disrespect, they would eventually love me the way they loved Chloe. I was desperately trying to buy a ticket to a show that had been permanently sold out since the day I was born. Cancer was the harsh, brutal wake-up call that violently ripped the blindfold from my eyes. Staring at the sterile ceiling of an oncology ward, I realized that my loyalty was a completely one-sided contract. They were actively cashing the checks of my devotion while simultaneously bankrupting my soul. The moment I fully accepted their profound emotional bankruptcy was the exact moment I reclaimed my absolute power. I stopped fighting for a seat at a table where I was the main course. I want you to look at your own life right now. Look at the people who consistently drain your energy, dismiss your accomplishments, and weaponize your vulnerabilities. Ask yourself why you are still handing them the keys to your mental sanctuary. It takes immense, terrifying courage to pack up your emotional bags and walk out the front door of your family history. You will lose people. You will face harsh judgment from outsiders who have absolutely no idea what happens behind your closed doors. People will call you bitter, angry, and unforgiving. Let them talk. The opinions of bystanders do not pay your bills, heal your trauma, or hold your hand when you are fighting for your life. You owe absolutely nothing to the people who watched you drown and complained that your splashing was ruining their view. I did not destroy my family. I simply held up a high-definition mirror to their faces and let them destroy themselves with their own breathtaking greed. Sometimes, the best revenge is not destruction. It is surviving, thriving, and turning off the light on those who left you in the dark. That is the ultimate victory. You do not need to scream your truth from the rooftops or beg for their belated apologies. You just need to succeed so massively that their absence becomes a completely irrelevant footnote in your spectacular biography. When I cut the cord tying me to Marcus, Brenda, Chloe, and Brad, I did not just survive my medical crisis. I thrived beyond my wildest corporate and personal imaginations. I built Vanguard Trust into an absolute financial juggernaut. I created a dedicated medical sanctuary for women who look exactly like me, ensuring they never have to fight their physical battles in the cold, dark isolation I experienced. I surrounded myself with fiercely loyal friends and dedicated colleagues who celebrate my victories without a single ounce of hidden resentment. My life is rich, full, and unapologetically beautiful. If you are standing on the terrifying edge of making a similar choice, I want you to jump. Cut the toxic ties. Block the phone numbers. Foreclose on the emotional real estate you have allowed abusers to occupy in your mind for free. The temporary pain of that initial separation is absolutely nothing compared to the permanent grueling agony of shrinking yourself to fit into their tiny, miserable boxes. You deserve to be celebrated, not merely tolerated. You deserve to be surrounded by people who view your presence as a massive blessing, not an inconvenient burden. So take back your power today. Reclaim your narrative and start building your own gorgeous empire from the absolute ground up to create the reality you have always wanted and entirely deserved all along. The journey ahead will absolutely test your ultimate physical and mental limits every single day. But the spectacular reward is an incredible, authentic life of unimaginable brilliance and pure, unshakable personal freedom. Let them sit in the dark and watch you shine brightly from a distance. Have you ever had to cut off toxic blood to save your own life? Share your story below. Stay strong, stay unapologetic, and remember, you are your own greatest investment.